Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about NASA crashing a satellite into an asteroid in the hopes of saving the world one day. We also talk about an Indian project that could one day lead to the publishing of the world's largest dictionary. But first, we talk about the Supreme Court. On Tuesday, the top court made history by live streaming its proceedings for the very first time. On that day, more than 8 lakh people tuned in to watch the court in action. And this is significant because for a very long time, only a limited number of people could get access to something like this. So what made the Supreme Court decide to do this? When we spoke to Indian Express's Apurva Vishwanath, who reports on law for the paper, she explained that the decision was based on a verdict that the court delivered in 2018.
It was in 2018 that a 3-judge bench of the Supreme Court had decided that its proceedings can be live telecast. There were several petitioners, including senior advocate Indira Jaisingh, and the common plea was that in the interest of transparency and furthering what we already know as an open court, the petitioners had requested the court that its proceedings should be live telecast.
And here the thing to note is that open court hearings have been the norm in the Indian legal system. Courts in most cases are required by law to be fully accessible to the public.
Which means that people can go watch the proceedings that are happening in the court, and the record of the court, which is through the daily orders or the judgments pronounced, will also be available to public. In case of judgments, there's usually a little tag on the right-hand corner which says reportable, which is most judgments, which means that they're accessible to public. Anybody can read them, anybody can use those judgments for fair and valid purposes. So, as a corollary to the idea of open courts, the petitioners had asked the court to live telecast its proceedings. And this is not a novel idea, this is something that courts across the world do so. The UK Supreme Court or the Canadian Supreme Court, the Brazilian Supreme Court, the International Court of Justice or the European Human Rights Court of Justice, a lot of these courts live stream their proceedings. It's for everybody across the world to watch.
And the reason they do this is in the interest of transparency and accountability. Plus, Apurva says that the live telecast of the proceedings also gives a lot of context to what is happening in the courts.
Key constitutional debates and arguments which capture the nation's imagination can't just happen in a courtroom with 50 people there, the lawyers and judges. So citizens at large are also partners to this conversation, and telecasting it live for everybody to watch enhances that. Everybody understands what's happening in court, and it's not just based on the outcomes but also on the context of why the court decided in a certain way. That's then for everybody to understand.
So when the petitioners argued in favor of this, the court then decided to seek the views of the Attorney General of India, K.K. Venugopal. And Venugopal, who she says has always championed the idea of access to justice, agreed to this proposal.
In fact, gave a list of guidelines for the court on how to implement live telecast and what are the do's and don'ts that the court will have to keep in mind. Once the AG's opinion was taken and it was a positive opinion, the court then in its judgment said that in principle, live streaming of court proceedings is welcome and, modalities had to be formed. But this was in 2018. Successive Chief Justices, even though there was a judicial decision, did not actually put the idea into action. It took the pandemic, the court shifting to a virtual platform, and in that process also building on the infrastructure. So you needed cameras in courtrooms that focused not only on the judges, but the lawyers who are arguing and other people in the court, right? Like, for example, the court master or the clerk sitting on the corner. So all of these were taken care of. And now that virtual proceedings anyway happen in even the Supreme Court, it's a step forward to have live telecast of proceedings.
And even though the Supreme Court just began doing this, high courts were the first ones to adopt this system following the 2018 verdict.
We saw with the Gujarat High Court, even during the pandemic, there was a bench which was exclusively hearing cases related to COVID. It was popularly called a COVID bench. They were live streaming its proceedings. The Karnataka High Court also did that. Its proceedings were live on YouTube. One of the first big cases that was probably watched by everybody across the country was the hijab hearing in the Karnataka High Court. So on one of the crucial days of hearing, the viewership went up to lakhs and everybody had tuned in to watch this case. So several high courts now have taken to live streaming its proceedings. Either they're happening in the Chief Justice's courts or, the first one or two courts. But now that it's an idea whose time has come, it's only going to spread to every court in the country.
This decision by the court seems to be in line with the principles of right to information and access to justice. People can now learn a lot more about how the judiciary functions, beyond what is reported in the media and what one sees on Twitter. Because reporters are regularly live tweeting whatever is being said in the court. But Apurva says a lot is obviously lost when someone is trying to fit everything in 160 characters.
What live telecast really does is there is a Socratic method of argumentation that happens in the Supreme Court. The judges ask questions, the lawyers debate. You can put all of this in much better context when you're watching the whole thing and not just picking one line or one statement in a tweet. So sometimes judges ask questions leading towards an answer. They push the lawyer, they take an adversarial stance so that the lawyer makes his best case.
And to illustrate this point better, Apurva cites an example.
Say, for example, in the constitutional case that is being heard right now, challenging the 10% reservation that is given to the economically weaker section of the society. So one of the first questions that Justice Rabindra Bhatt, who is part of the 5-judge bench, asked is when lawyers started citing earlier case law on how the courts have struck down such a legislation. The first thing that Justice Bhatt said, these are all office memoranda that have been struck down. Where is the legislation? There has never been a legislation which is struck down or a constitutional amendment that has been struck down. In the absence of that, how can we rely on your office memoranda?
Now, without context, it seems that Justice Bhatt is trying to say that the lawyer has no case and that he has already made up his mind about it.
And this happens on the first day, imagine. So it's almost like saying the petitioners have no case. But the case was, of course, heard for a week. Extensive deliberations have happened. Academicians, including Mr. Mohan Gopal, have come and argued before the court. What Justice Bhatt did is to just set up the stage and say that what you need to prove to us is the threshold for striking down of, say, an office memoranda and a constitutional amendment are different. But still the court has powers to do that. This is what the lawyer will have to prove in the next 4 or 5 days whenever they're arguing. So it's actually asking the lawyer to come to the point and breaking it down to what the real issues are. This is putting the lawyer on his toes sometimes. And sometimes I think the live telecast will also lay bare the urgency of the court. Sometimes how they can't decide a certain case because there's just not enough time or some other issue has come up. What you will see is a very busy Monday morning or Friday morning in the Supreme Court, where the court takes up miscellaneous matters for hearing. These are sometimes commercial cases with thousands of crores hanging in the balance. Lawyers get a bare 1 or 2 minutes to just say what they want. Sometimes even before they've made their argument, the court says accepted or rejected. So when this happens, you also see the limitations of the processes that we have, where a lawyer might have spent days and weeks preparing the case, but on a Monday morning, how it's dismissed in 2 minutes. Of course, it's not to say that it's the only 2 minutes that have gone into this decision making. The judge has, of course, read the files beforehand, has come prepared on what to do with this particular case. But these are all some of the things that citizens will actually get to watch and participate in these proceedings.
But this does not mean that every proceeding will be telecast live. There will be some matters that will continue to remain restricted.
Like when it involves a matrimonial dispute, for example, or when matters of national security, or cases that involve, say, juveniles or persons whose safety needs to be protected, or when it contains confidential or sensitive information, like, say, in case of sexual assault or issues like that. Or in some cases, this could also mean cases which may provoke sentiments and, bring in more animosity between communities. So these are cases that for now, as per the Attorney General's guidelines, that the court can reserve its right to not live telecast the proceedings. But as a rule, cases which are being heard by a constitution bench will be telecast live.
Now, despite its benefits to the public at large, Apurva says that one concern that remains is that things could still be plucked out of context.
A short 1-minute clip on a judge scolding an IAS officer is viral on YouTube and on social media platforms with captions like "angry judge puts IAS in his place" and things like that. So there is that obvious risk of things being played out of context, but that can happen, irrespective of whether proceedings are live streamed or live tweeted or any sort of function there. But I think there are also some other issues which studies have also shown, and there are legitimate concerns about this. One of which is, of course, is there a risk of the court turning populist? There is a study of US legislators in the Senate, and when proceedings were streamed live on the channel C-SPAN, studies show that proceedings of the House were stalled more often, that legislators made speeches just to stop the introduction of a bill, but generally pandering to their constituency rather than playing a proactive role in legislative making. There are also studies from experiences from the Brazilian Supreme Court. Since 2002, the Brazilian Supreme Court telecasts its proceedings live, both by audio and video. And there is a study which showed that judges were taking more time since the proceedings started going live, which means they would make longer speeches or take more time to comment on certain issues, which are all indicative of judges playing to the gallery. Perhaps now, in the Indian context, there are 15 or 20 Supreme Court reporters who notice these playing for the gallery moments. But now that will be on display for the whole country to watch. So these are some things that there are concerns about live streaming. Even judges have expressed some concerns, which is attack against judges on social media. Given the public offices they occupy, judges don't come and clarify their remarks or issue corrections to what they said in court. In the absence of that, there is a considerable risk of judges being targeted for a statement that they make. Not every person understands the legalese that is being spoken in the court or the way in which arguments are happening. It could be construed as a judge's personal opinion rather than a question that he's asking the lawyer or a comment he's making on the case. So these are all some concerns that exist, but nothing comes in the way of greater transparency and, more openness. The more people get acquainted with the system, the better the engagement will be.
And next we talk about NASA, the US Space Agency. On Tuesday morning, India time, NASA deliberately crashed one of its spacecraft into an asteroid that was about 11 million kilometers away from Earth. This was a big deal for NASA, and it required a lot of planning. This is the reason why the people who were part of the project cheered ecstatically when the spacecraft finally managed to hit the asteroid.
4, 3, 2, 1. Oh my gosh.
Oh, wow. Awaiting visual confirmation. And we have impact. A giant leap for humanity in the name of planetary defense.
Woo. Fantastic.
Now the question is, why did NASA do this? Why did it hit that asteroid? And the answer is, so that one day it can actually stop an asteroid that is heading towards Earth. One that is big enough to destroy a large part of the planet. Or, as they call it in science fiction movies, when the asteroid or comet is a planet killer.
Last summer, 2 comets were discovered that are on a collision course with Earth.
Oh my God.
This comet is what we call a planet killer.
It's the size of Texas, Mr. President. It's what we call a global killer, the end of mankind. Half the world being...
So similar to what scientists have done in movies and novels, NASA through this project also attempted to change the path of the asteroid by hitting it. Though obviously it did so in a much more scientific and systematic way. When we spoke to Indian Express's Amitabh Sinha, who writes on science and outer space, he told us more about it.
So basically it is a technology demonstration exercise to demonstrate the capability of human beings to deflect an asteroid that might be coming in the direction of Earth and probably hit the Earth and cause large-scale destruction. So the idea was that by crashing one of its satellites on one relatively smaller asteroid, we would be able to deflect its current orbit enough so that it changes its trajectory. And if we are able to do this successfully, then we would have demonstrated our capability to do it in more real-life situations wherein we actually find an asteroid hurtling towards the Earth.
He says that this particular asteroid that NASA hit did not pose any threat to Earth and was chosen because it was much further away from us, about 300 times the distance to the moon. Now, considering that NASA is working on such a project, how worried should we be about an asteroid actually hitting Earth?
So it depends on what kind of asteroids we are talking about. Smaller asteroids, the size of stones or pebbles, or slightly bigger, they keep falling towards the Earth fairly regularly. And most of them burn down when they enter the Earth's atmosphere and encounter the air friction. And they burn down and they wither away in the atmosphere. Some of it, there have been instances, some of them even fall onto the Earth, but these are again small ones, the size of, say, small stones or pebbles, and they have been found on Earth. They don't pose that kind of threat. The threat is from larger asteroids that are much bigger in size and which would not totally burn out even when traveling through the Earth's atmosphere. The danger is from those kind of asteroids. Now, there are known to be millions of asteroids circling, going around the sun. We know a few thousand of them. We know the trajectories of these. We probably know the sizes and in some cases also the composition of these asteroids. But there are large number of them which are completely unknown. We know nothing about them. We have not sighted them.
And scientists say that asteroids are quite hard to track. One, because there are so many of them, and two, because most asteroids are very dark in color and are tough to detect against the blackness of space. Now, NASA says that among the asteroids that we do know about, no big asteroid is coming our way in the next 100 years at least.
So this is from the known pool of asteroids, the ones that we know about. But of course, there are, as I said, several which we don't know. So anyone can surprise us, things that we do not know of. This particular test that was done today was to gain that kind of capability that if in future we come to know of something that is coming towards us, we should have that capability to deflect it from its orbit. And this, by the way, is only one way of preventing this kind of disaster. There are other ways as well, but this one is the most talked about. And this is what probably you would have seen in films and read in science fiction as well, that asteroid coming towards Earth and then last minute, scientists managed to deflect it through some methods. By the way, these asteroids cannot be deflected at the last minute. If you have to do it, you have to actually intervene much earlier and much further away to be able to deflect, change its trajectory by a small amount, and over the long distance that it still has to come towards the Earth, it would probably deviate enough to completely move away from the Earth, not come in this direction.
Basically, you can't stop it at the last minute like they show in movies. But an event like this is not impossible. For example, we now know that about 1 million years ago, dinosaurs became extinct after a 10-kilometer asteroid collided with Earth. But we have more recent examples as well. In 2013, an asteroid entered the Earth's atmosphere and exploded over Russia. This was relatively small in size, only about 18 meters. That's why it didn't make an impact, but the explosion was significant.
It did cause lots of injuries to people in that region. People got sunburns, they got skin diseases because of heat. So those kind of things can happen. But compared to the asteroid that we targeted today and a lot of others which are traveling in space, it was relatively small. The one that we targeted today, Dimorphos, it is called, that is 160 meters in width. That would be roughly the size of a football field, I think, or maybe slightly more than that. That is the size. So if that kind of asteroid, something 150, 160 meters in width, if that comes and falls on Earth, that can cause large-scale devastation.
And Amitabh says that hitting that asteroid was hard to do, especially if we consider the infinity of space. In that vastness, 160 meters is only a speck of dust. He says that targeting it was like hitting a moving bullet with another moving bullet. In fact, in many ways, it was even harder than that. And right now, even though the spacecraft hit the asteroid, we don't know if it actually made any difference. That will only become known in the coming weeks.
What is the deviation that has been caused in the orbit of that asteroid? as a matter of more observation. And there are quite a few observations that are already on. So in fact, immediately after impact, there was already one particular mission that went there. It was planned that way, that just about a few minutes after the impact, there was one, I think, European mission that was passing by that area, and it did make a few observations. Another European mission is supposed to be launched in 2024 to study the aftermath of this particular collision, this test. So then it will go and observe it closely, see what impact has been made because of this test, whether and how much has it deviated from its original trajectory. So those kind of studies would be done. A lot of telescopes would continue to observe these two asteroids. Remember, it's very, very far away, and these are not planets. These are very, very small objects, and it's very difficult to view them. And that's why immediately we do not know how much of an impact it has made, but it has been hit, no doubt. And the actual deviation we'll come to know in coming weeks and months.
And in the end, we talk about the making of a dictionary. For the past 74 years, the linguistic department of the Deccan College, Pune, has been working on an ambitious project to publish an encyclopedic Sanskrit dictionary. And even though it started just after independence, the dictionary is nowhere close to being finished. Its final word count, though, is estimated to reach 20 lakh, and it would then be the world's largest dictionary of Sanskrit. Recently, the college allowed students and the general public to visit the scriptorium and the editorial room of the dictionary. And Indian Express's Anjali Marar was there to check it out. She now joins us to talk about this painstaking project. Anjali, this project was conceived by the linguist S.M. Katre in 1948. Could you talk about what had been the idea behind it?
The whole process began in 1948, as you mentioned, by S.M. Katre. It was to basically have a dictionary, a consolidated dictionary of Sanskrit. And because there was not one available before, the idea of having one started off. And Deccan College is one of the very few institutions, even today, which offer course of Sanskrit and lexicography as a combination. So that is where the essence lies. As in, it was a novel idea to have a dictionary exclusively for Sanskrit.
Okay, so it has been over 7 decades since the project started. How far has it reached?
So it's been 7 decades, but the Sanskrit scholars are still finding words from the first alphabet A. And if you look at the numbers, 35 volumes have been published of the same alphabet. And this can roughly be around 6,000 pages. So if you ask where the project is, it would be nice to say it's the first alphabet. There are 46 alphabets, so we are still at the first alphabet. Oh.
And Anjali, what do people who are part of this project say is the biggest challenge in doing this work?
One big challenge is to stay motivated and keep doing the same stuff every single day in and out. Plus, they are not only involved in the Sanskrit project. They are professors, they are teachers, so they have their teaching assignments, they have their own research happening. So finding time for Sanskrit dictionary requires real motivation. But more than that, the initial scholars who started off this project have done a very big contribution by culling out all the paper slips where all the information is available. 1 crore slips are available. A very strong foundation has been laid. It is thereon where the present scholars are working on.
Yeah, and a lot of this work is very painstaking. It requires reading a lot of old books and ancient text and then extracting words from them. So talk a bit more about that aspect of this work, which seems very tedious.
Yes. So we all use dictionaries, or we all have used dictionaries, but very few of us know the effort behind it. So imagine reading some 1464 books for 25 long years, and you're picking every word possible that comes to you, and you're shortlisting it, whether it will go or not into the dictionary. So once such a word is selected, then you have to identify and look for the possible meanings for that word. So if I could give you an example in Hindi, the word shiksha can have multiple meanings. For example, it can have meaning as punishment. The meaning can be education. So having words of multiple meanings, finding their context, finding the reference where it was used, which book it was used. So this is all the job that the scholars have been doing, not just extracting words, but finding the meaning, context, where it was used, and noting it down onto a paper slip. Now, I'm talking of an era where it was not digital. So you were actually penning it down onto a paper and noting it down. So that's what the paper slips would do. And the present scholars, what they're doing is they're taking out each of the paper slips and verifying the information and providing maximum information which needs to be provided with that word. It's not a simple dictionary, but it's an encyclopedic dictionary going beyond meanings. And if everything goes well, then one word with having, say, 20, 25 meanings even can get into the dictionary. So it's a whole lot of process that goes inside identifying and taking one word to the dictionary.
And how would this project compare to, say, the Oxford English Dictionary, which we know took about 100 years to finish?
That's right. So Oxford English Dictionary would be the second closest in terms of volume, in terms of number of words which is there, or the period for which it was taken to have it. So Oxford English Dictionary, though it's completed, but still words can get added. It roughly has about 2.9 lakh words. And it has been published in about 17 volumes. But when the Sanskrit dictionary will be prepared and it will be ready, it will have 20 lakh words. So 3 lakh words to 20 lakh words. 17 volumes to, I don't know how many volumes, I can't give you a figure, but you can multiply it at least 3 or 4 times larger it will be. A similar dictionary in the Dutch has about 4.5 lakh words and it has 17 volumes. So by and large, the Sanskrit dictionary could beat all other dictionaries in the world once it is ready.
And considering that this is such an ambitious project, do they have enough people who can work on it? People who are well versed in Sanskrit?
So when we look at the sheer volume of this project, more the hands, the merrier it is. But the scholars themselves have been admitting that there is a shortfall for people who can understand Sanskrit or who can use their skills in this dictionary project. But still, now given that it's been going on for 70 years, there have been able people involved in the project. Currently, there are 22 scholars headed by a general editor, Professor Prasad Joshi, who's a 9th general editor for the project. And they are doing it. So every day, some amount of time is exclusively kept for the dictionary work. So it's a back and forth teamwork. The team prepares something, gives it to the editor for review. The editor then sends back his comments to the team. It goes to the press. Then after once it's printed and come out, again, there's a peer review happening. So there's a whole lot of process happening within the team. But roughly there are about 22 to 25 scholars who are always working on the project. And they're all youngsters at the moment. They are faculty at the department. So yes, shortfall is there, but they are still doing a splendid job.
And you know, earlier when the project started in 1948, obviously there weren't any computers then. So how has the advent of technology changed things, and what does the future of this project look like?
So earlier, if all the reading, all the extraction of words, writing down was done manually, now the present scholars are way luckier. There is, with the advent of technology, there's a special software which the Ministry of Electronics and IT is partnering and preparing for them. They're developing a software which is called as Koshashri. It is still under the development stage. And there is also going to be a special font by the same name, which will be used for this project. So what happens once this software comes in, that the present scholars will not have to manually go and read, but they can simply do a search using the software and find the word, which book it belonged to, find where the word is. So basically, it will quicken the process of publishing the volumes. So once the technology has come in the recent years, the scholars have been able to publish one volume within roughly a year or little over a year. And one volume can have about 5,000 words. Technology has definitely helped them in speeding up the process of publishing the volumes.
You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.